And here we are now to talk about valves. So valves are how we control every single central heating water radiator on the system. Okay, and at one end you'll have a thing called a TRV, or a thermostatic relief valve. That is the one that you will be using almost always. You will almost exclusively use that to control your radiator. You can forget about this 99% of the time. The only time that you will ever have to think about this is when you're first setting up the system, or if you've ever got problems with the whole thing heating up. Then you will use this other one. You can put this one down now. You can talk about the lock shield valve. Now, the lock shield valve, under a decorative cap, which will be at the other end of the radiator, and I'll show you that in a minute, how they're mounted, will have something like this. There we have a screw. You operate it with a screwdriver, or sometimes it's an Allen key. But basically, they're designed like this to be slightly more difficult to operate, because you don't want to be doing it all the time. The reason why it's called a lock shield valve is that once you've done that, you then lock it off. You shield it with that decorative cap. I'm sure that's probably why it was called that. This valve, like all other valves, have in the middle of them an orifice, which is great to get the word orifice in any discussion. And the orifice opens up when you open up the valve, or closes down when you shut down the valve. Now, remember a moment ago we were talking about Graham's radiator, which was very big water gallery. It's very easy for the water to flow around it. If this was on Graham's radiator, this would be shut right down, so it then made it more difficult for the water to go around Granny's radiator. Conversely, the tall one, the designer radiator that you've got in the kitchen, it was pretty hard to get the water around there. You would open that right up, and you would do that across all of the radiators in the system, either shutting down or opening up the lock shield valve, more or less, in order to make it as easy or difficult for the water to flow through every single radiator. Balance them. Okay, pretty straightforward. There's a much lengthier discussion about exactly how to do it, because it does take a while to do properly. It might take half a day to do properly on a very big system. And there's a discussion on exactly how to do that on the Eskimo website. We can point you towards that at some other point. I think all I want to do now, first of all, we might want to show you where these would go on a radiator. You know, you'll always have the lock shield at one end. This is one of our Ron radiators, but it doesn't matter whether it's Eskimo or anybody else. It's all the same. And then you'll have a thermostatic valve on the other end. That'd be the same when you're on our outline range, or like I say, even sort of steel panel radiators, Granny's old schoolhouse radiators, whatever it is, they all have the same controls, the lock shield valve. Now, one of the things I do want to do, I think it would be useful, would be to go through some of the things that we've heard over the years, where we will have, because they come up again. Not time and time again, but we hear, we've been doing it for 21 years, you're bound to hear the same things repeated. One of the first things we very often hear is the plumber will say, the installer will say, oh look, the pipes going into the radiator, they're red hot, but the radiator itself isn't getting warm. But because the pipes are red hot, that must mean that there's water flowing. There must be a problem in the radiator. The radiator must be blocked. It never is. Radiators, I've never in 21 years come across a radiator that's ever been blocked, either of our manufacturer or anybody else's. It's always the same phenomenon. Essentially, all that's happening is there will be a dribble of water along the bottom the water will flow in through the flow and back out through the return. And okay, sometimes it can be air in the system, and that's a different thing where we're talking about bleeding. But don't worry about that now. You can have this where it will just go along the bottom. It will be a trickle of water running along the bottom of the thing and back out the other side. It hasn't got enough. It can't overcome the pressure drop of the radiator. So there isn't enough pressure at this point in the system to get it to flow all the way around the radiator. That is balancing. It's the same thing. Cold spots. Very often we have this thing where people will say, okay, it's the water's coming into the radiator. Down here, and by the time it gets to here, it's freezing cold. Or it's hot here and it's not hot here. It depends how each radiator is flowed internally, but it's the same thing. It can't overcome the pressure drop of the radiator. The water can't overcome that, the pressure drop of the radiator, and so it won't flow around it. You need to throttle down the flow on some of the other radiators and force it into this one. It's always the same thing. Okay, so another one, that could be noisy radiators. It's very often the same thing. That's because you haven't got it fully flowing around the system. then we might have something like it's the first radiator on the system, it should work. Well, remember what we were talking about earlier on when we looked at that diagram. It doesn't matter where the radiator is on the system, it's got to get through the same lot of pipe work after it comes out of there. So it could be the first, third, second, fourth, doesn't make any difference. You have to balance them. Okay, this is the only radiator that's not working. That's another one we hear, you know. Well, of course, like for the reasons we discussed earlier, you could have a single radiator not working, doesn't make any difference. It needs balancing. The old one worked in its place. Well, that's, I think we've already discussed that. In a way, you can probably see what the answer is going to be to this one. But it might be an old schoolhouse radiator. It might have had different characteristics than the radiator that you're now putting in its place. And so it may have worked perfectly well before, but as soon as this radiator goes in, you've then got to balance the system to get the water to flow around this one. Okay. Similarly, you can sometimes have the opposite. You put a new radiator in the system, all of the other ones stop working because it's suddenly become much easier to get the water around this one. Do you see what I mean? And so again, you've got to balance the system. It doesn't really make any difference. We hear things about, yeah, radiator must be blocked. That's the sort of final thing. It's never blocked. We hear things, maybe the diverter. Now, let me just tell you one quick thing. Some radiators, some of our radiators, some of other people's radiators as well, but not all of our radiators, have a diverter in, and that's just to encourage the flow of water around there. It'll be a little, I'm not sure if I can even show you an example, but it'll just be a little baffle plate at the bottom of there, and it just forces the flow, encourages the flow to go around. Again, we've never, because we've taken radiators apart, we've looked at them, we've done all of these things over the years. We've never yet come across a problem of this nature that can't be resolved by balancing. We've never had a blocked radiator, we've never had a diverter missing. So it always comes back to the same phenomenon. Guess what I'm going to say? Balance your system. Thanks very much.